On the 2nd of June 2010, 12 people were killed and 11 were injured during a killing spree. It ended with the murderer taking his own life. This is the case of the Cumbria shooting. In the early hours in the morning of the 2nd of June 2010, Derrick Bird drove to the farmhouse, High Trees in Lamplugh. Derrick let himself into his twin brother's house. Using a rifle and a silencer, he shot him in his sleep. David was found several hours later with his distressed Labrador, Jed, by his side. According to his daughters, nicest man you could ever meet, doting Dad and Grandad. He will not only be missed by us, but by the whole community. People would speak of his kindness and humour. He was said to be laid back and friendly. He was also supposed to be eccentric. He used to wear his overalls to bed and never had a window repaired. Like Derrick, he wasn't paranoid and didn't mind being teased by people. Neighbours said he would always be at hand to help them out. He was sociable and would meet with friends for a drink or two, or have them around to his farmhouse. Kevin Commons was one of David's closest friends. Derrick drove to Mowbray Farm in Frizzington. At 10:20 in the morning, Kevin Commons came out of his house. Derrick lay in wait and shot him dead on the driveway. The silencer wasn't fitted then, so the neighbours were alerted by the gunshots and called the police. Kevin was a 60-year-old solicitor and had set up K.J. Commons law firm in the 1980s. He would help anyone who came to his office, irrespective of whether or not they could pay. His next victim was Darren Rucastle, who was a friend of Derrick's. Derrick wrongly suspected him of having an affair with Derrick's ex-partner, Linda Mills. They had also argued over queue jumping. Derrick went to the taxi rank at Duke Street in Whitehaven at 10:30. Another driver said Derrick called over, "Darren, here, I want you." Darren turned towards him and Derrick shot him in the face. Darren's nickname was the Chancer. He was 43 years old and liked to gamble. He would fearlessly stand up for things he felt passionately about. He had a wicked sense of humour. He was a lovable rogue who was a speedway and football fanatic. There was another cab driver nearby, Don Reed. He managed to duck as the gun erupted, receiving shrapnel wounds. Don also tried to help him, but as soon as he got to him, he saw his face was gone and was beyond help. Then Bird shot at Paul Wilson, who thought of Bird as a close friend. Wilson was walking down Scotch Street past the police station. Bird called out to Wilson, then pulled the trigger. The bullet skimmed his cheek. It was only when someone said you've been shot that he put his hands to his face and could feel the blood. Paul got to the police station and gave the name and mobile phone number of Bird. Up the road from Scotch Street, he called out to 15-year-old Ashley Gaster. He asked her, "Do you want something?" As she approached his car, she saw the shotgun and leapt to the ground. She felt the bullet whistle past her ponytail. When she tried to flee, he aimed at her again. She managed to dodge the fire and ran to her sister for safety. The police were chasing Derrick at this point. At Coach Street, he pointed his gun at Terry Kennedy, another taxi driver. He had a passenger, Emma Percival, with him. Derrick drew up to the car and shot at them. Terry didn't realise he'd been shot until he turned to Emma, who was covered with flesh and blood. And unfortunately for Terry, although he got off lightly compared to some others, have his hand amputated as a result of his wounds. Emma was also injured in the neck, arm and side. AC Mick Taylor got on the scene after it happened and said, "Run to me, lass." Bird tried to shoot her again, but the police van had blocked his path. Derrick's next murder victim was Susan Hughes. She was 57, a mother of two who had devoted her life to looking after her disabled daughter. She'd been shopping at the Co-op, and she was going up a steep hill, struggling with the weight of her grocery bags. Bird stopped his car and shot her twice in the stomach. Barry Moss was cycling past and ran to her aid. She was still breathing but unconscious. 5 minutes later, she was dead. She was Derrick's first random killing. Her youngest daughter was 27 years old, disabled, and living in sheltered accommodation. She lived with her mother until Susan could no longer cope with her care. Susan worked in the local disability centre, Copeland Occupational and Social Centre. Her colleagues paid tribute. Sue was so full of fun and a very important part of our caring team. Her eldest daughter Melinda was a social worker. The next murder victim was Kenneth Fishburne. He was 71 years old and a retired soldier and security guard at Sellafield. He was crossing the bridge over at River Ehan on his way to a betting shop. Bird shot him in the back and drove off, firing his gun in the air. Kenneth died 20 yards from his house. He'd served 25 years in the forces with the Durham Light Infantry, plus 5 years as a reservist, including 6 months each year with UN peacekeeping force. He finished up as a security guard at Sellafield. He was well liked in the area. He described him as quiet and private, who liked a few bets and a game of snooker. After that, Derrick had gone to Egremont and aimed at Les Hunter, who was visiting a friend. He called over, "Have you got a minute, mate?" As Hunter leaned in, he saw the shotgun but turned his head away. The pellets hit his cheek and ear. He then targeted Jason Carey, who was an instructor at his diving club, and he bore him a serious grudge. This was because Derrick was a member of Solway Sub-Aqua Club and had reprimanded Derrick for taking a novice out into the deep water. This caused Derrick to hate Jason intensely, which feeds into the fact that Derrick was a very paranoid personality and just couldn't take criticism. He had some sort of mental illness, but I'm not sure whether it was ever analysed, never recognised medically, put it that way. He arrived at his door at Wilton. His wife, that's Jason's wife, was trying to restrain their dog to open the door. By the time she opened it, he was walking away. Jason managed to escape the wrath of Derrick. Fortunate for him, the dogs were playing up. So Norman Shearer was a friend of Bird's next murder victim. He was driving his tractor and Bird sped past him. He heard a shot minutes later at the brow of the hill, which brings us to Isaac Dixon, known by his friends as Spike Dixon. Derrick shot and killed Isaac, who was a mole catcher and had worked at Sellafield. Dixon had been walking his dogs and setting traps and was talking to Norman Sherman. They attended each other's wedding. He described him as a good guy and a friend. So Isaac was known as Spike because of his tall, lanky frame, and he was 65 years old at the time of this. Divorced and was in a relationship with a lady called Pat at the time of his death. He had 2 children and 6 grandchildren. He had a small holding and regularly helped his elderly neighbours, giving them fresh eggs from his hens. By this time, all available police in the area, including 42 armed officers, had been deployed to try and stop Derrick in his tracks. Which brings us to his next 2 murder victims, who are a married couple, Jimmy and Jennifer Jackson. At 11:05 in Wilton, he sees retired tax worker Jennifer Jackson. She was a regular churchgoer who worked as the parish secretary. She bought a newspaper and she was going to meet her husband Jimmy, who was getting some gentle exercise. Bird tooted his horn and Jennifer turned round and he shot her dead. She was a regular at her congregation and volunteered as a parish secretary. Jimmy was talking to his neighbours Steve and Christine Hunter at Tower End Farm. He drove past them and shot Jimmy in the head and killed him. Jimmy had spent his life working for the ambulance service. He'd had a recent operation and was taking a walk to get some exercise. They had 2 children, Christopher and Catherine. The couple were heavily involved in village life. Steve tried to pull his wife out of the line of fire, but she was shot and suffered a collapsed lung as a result. Police had to get assistance from the RAF and the Lancashire Force. The nuclear plant at Sellafield was shut down due to the emergency of a madman going on a gun rampage. His next murder victim was called Gary Purdham. 5 minutes after killing Jimmy and Jennifer, he shot him. He was trimming his hedges on his father's farmland. Bird got out of his car, approached him and shot him in the head. Gary was a former semi-professional rugby player, and his brother Rob was a famous British rugby player who captained Harlequins. His family had farmed in the area for years. He was happily married to Ros and had 2 sons aged 2 and 8. At the first Whitehaven Rugby Club home match following the shootings, Gary's wife Ros released 12 white doves to commemorate him and the other murder victims. By this stage, the shootings had made the news and residents of Cumbria were being advised to stay indoors until the situation had been contained. It was half-term, so there were a lot of people at the local seaside. Sam Edwards, who was 25, on hearing the news, the alarm to warn daymakers there. Jamie Clark was Bird's youngest victim at the age of 23. His fiancée, Leanne Jarman, was desperately trying to call him on his mobile and just couldn't get a signal. Jamie was an estate agent and had been driving back from a viewing. Bird shot at him while he was driving, causing him to crash, and the emergency services were called, believing it was just a car accident, and were shocked when they got to his vehicle and found that he was riddled with bullet holes. He worked for Belvoir Estate Agency in Cockermouth. He moved there from Buckinghamshire when he became engaged, as his fiancée was living in Carlisle to study. His colleague, Ryan Park, said he was one of the nicest lads he had ever met. He was also the son of a lottery millionaire who won £2.3 million in 2001, £2.3 million sterling in 2001. At 11:25, Bird arrived at Seascale to see Harry Berger, a local pub landlord. He was rushing to collect a prescription for his wife. He was in a Land Rover and Bird collided with him. As a result, Bird shot him and Berger lifted his arm to his face. The bullet took away part of Berger's arm, but Tony Willock, who was passing by and trying to help, was shocked when he asked him to arrange to pick up his prescription for his wife. So Tony rang the pharmacy. Then Harry started shouting for help due to the pain once the shock had subsided. While they waited for the air ambulance, the local cafe was transformed into a makeshift clinic. And David Moore was there, who was a reservist firefighter and had been asked by his station to attend the scene. William Hogg also there, just a passerby, and they did their best to make him feel comfortable. The murder victim was called Michael Pike. 26 seconds after he shot Berger, he shot Michael Pike's bicycle back tyre. Michael put his foot down and Bird shot him in the cheek. He was 64 years old and married to Sheena and had retired to Cumbria and was enjoying his daily bike ride when he was shot. He was a trade union organiser at Sellafield. His daughter Jude said he doted on his 3 grandchildren, and one of the witnesses of the shooting was only 9 years old. His name was Jordan Williams, and his statement basically just said there was blood everywhere, it was horrible. I assume that was from the press, maybe. I mean, I have actually got most of this information from this book. So whether she spoke to the people concerned, the lady's name is Claire Lee. So you can't get it on Kindle, but you can get it through Amazon if you're interested in buying the book in its entirety. He was with his 4-year-old sister, another friend, and his mother Jill. Jill described Bird as having piercing black eyes. They'd only gone out to buy ice cream. Jane Robinson was Bird's final murder victim. She was just 2 yards from Michael when he shot her. She was 66 and doing her part-time job delivering catalogues. She wasn't far from the home she shared with her twin sister. She was an animal lover who kept pigeons. In 1998, her and her sister Barry were featured on ITV, campaigning to save birds. So ITV is if you're watching this abroad, just a television channel in the UK. So yes, the birds were contaminated by radioactivity from Sellafield, and as she was an animal lover, her and her sister were campaigning to try and help them. And she worked for PDSA, so he called to her and shot her in the face. The local GP, Dr. Barry Walker, arrived on the scene of Drigg Road to help. He couldn't recognise them as they'd both been shot in the face. Bird kept driving and shot at a woman walking up a hill at Seascale. He later opened fire on a teenager. CCTV showed police were only a few minutes behind him. Due to the size of their vehicles, they struggled to catch up. Finally, Derrick Bird drove towards the village of Boot into the Lake District National Park. It is there that he took his own life at 1:30 p.m. in the woods. So obviously, as he took his own life, there was no trial because he executed himself. Sum up, I'll let you know, was received. The UK, unlike America, doesn't have that much in the way of mass shootings due to our restrictive gun laws. David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister at the time, was joined by several other MPs expressing their shock and horror during question time, Prime Minister question time. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, paid tribute to the response of the emergency services. David Cameron and Theresa May visited on the 4th of June 2010 to meet the victims, officials and locals. Jamie Reid, who is the local MP, called the incident the blackest day in our community's history. On the 2nd of June, Queen Elizabeth II said she shared the nation's grief and horror. Prince Charles, who's now King Charles, visited Whitehaven on the 11th of June 2010 to meet members of the community. So that's the end of the story of Derrick Bird. No through other. So my main source for this was the book I showed you. What's it called again? Massacre in Cumbria. And I have listened to a few podcasts as well, and there was also information about shortly before all this, he was trying to get into a relationship with a woman he'd met in Thailand, and I think she might have been a sex worker, trying to get her to join him in the UK, and I think she just basically spent his money and didn't come over. And I think that might have been maybe a catalyst for it. He was going through a very paranoid period. He didn't like his twin brother. Apparently they were very different. I think David was seen as more successful than Derrick, and they were non-identical as well. Whether that makes a difference, I don't know, but I know they had very different personalities. But I found this case interesting, and if you do like my content, please like and subscribe. I've been Anne-Marie. Thank you. Bye.